Total surrender to God's will is not a casual decision. It is a radical and intentional act of obedience. It's laying down every part of yourself, your mind, your heart, your ambitions, your fears, and your future at the feet of the Almighty. It is acknowledging that His thoughts are higher than your thoughts, and His ways are beyond your understanding. This surrender requires breaking free from the illusion of control and recognizing that your life was never meant to be self-governed, but divinely guided. To fully surrender is to trust God even when you can't trace Him. It means stepping out of the driver's seat and allowing God to navigate the journey, even when the road ahead is foggy and the destination seems far off. It's when you stop wrestling with God over the outcomes and start resting in His promises. This surrender is not passive. It is active, deliberate, and sometimes uncomfortable. It means letting go of relationships that hinder your growth, releasing habits that conflict with His word, and walking away from opportunities that glitter but are not God ordained. It's sacrificing the need for immediate answers and embracing the process of waiting. Surrender demands that you place your desires on the altar, even when they seem good, and say, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. It's when you stop negotiating with God and start yielding to Him without conditions, without ultimatums, and without backup plans. This level of surrender confronts your pride, challenges your independence, and requires vulnerability. It calls for obedience in the small, mundane tasks and in the great, life-changing decisions. It is trusting God when He says go, even when you don't know where, and trusting Him when He says stay, even when you feel ready to move. Total surrender does not mean life will be easy. In fact, it often invites trials that refine you and circumstances that stretch you. But even in the stretching, even in the breaking, God is molding you into the vessel He needs you to be. He is pruning away what cannot go into the next season, stripping away the weights that slow you down, and shaping your character to align with His divine purpose. Surrender means acknowledging that His timing is perfect, even when it feels delayed. It's recognizing that His no is as much a blessing as His yes. It's trusting that the doors He closes are just as important as the ones He opens. It's understanding that God sees the full picture when all you can see is a single puzzle piece. In surrender, you stop striving for approval from people and start seeking alignment with God. You stop chasing temporary satisfaction and start pursuing eternal purpose. Your identity becomes rooted in who God says you are, not in the labels the world tries to put on you. Surrendering to God is not losing yourself. It is discovering who you truly are in Him. This surrender transforms your perspective. What once felt like loss becomes gain because you understand that God never takes something without intending to replace it with something greater. What once seemed like sacrifice becomes joy because His plans are far better than anything you could have imagined. Surrender is a daily decision, a moment-by-moment choice. It's not a one-time event, but a continual laying down of self so that God can rise within you. It is saying yes to God before you even know what He will ask of you. It's embracing the unknown with the confidence that God is already there, working all things for your good. Consistent prayer and communication with God are the foundation of a life dedicated to Him. Prayer is not just a ritual or a set of words spoken in a moment of need. It is the very lifeblood of a relationship with God. It is the heartbeat of connection, a continual dialogue between the Creator and His creation. To live a life dedicated to God, prayer must be woven into the fabric of daily existence. It should never be confined to specific times, but it should flow from your spirit, constantly seeking to align your heart with God's will. Too often we treat prayer like an emergency hotline, dialing it only when we are in trouble. But prayer, when consistent, becomes more than just a reaction to life's challenges. It becomes a proactive way to live. It is a discipline that cultivates intimacy with God, a space where we are not just talking, but also listening. Communication with God goes beyond words. It's a heart posture, a willingness to open yourself up and hear his voice. Prayer is not a monologue. It is a dialogue where God speaks and we are willing to listen. It's in the quiet moments, the stillness of our hearts, that we often hear his whisper, guiding us, directing us, and comforting us. But consistency in prayer requires more than just regularity. It demands a heart of perseverance. In a world full of distractions, it can be easy to let our prayer life slip away. Life gets busy and we sometimes feel as though we are too tired or overwhelmed to pray. However, a consistent prayer life is not built on convenience, but on conviction. It's choosing to pray even when you don't feel like it, knowing that it is in those moments that your spirit is being strengthened. The habit of prayer is not based on emotions or external circumstances, but on a commitment to remain connected to the source of all strength. Prayer should be continuous, not simply confined to the morning or evening hours. The Apostle Paul tells us to pray without ceasing. This doesn't mean we are on our knees 24/7, but it does mean that we should cultivate a constant awareness of God's presence. It's a prayer in our hearts while we're at work, while we're driving, while we're interacting with others. It's a moment by moment acknowledgement that God is with us, that his presence surrounds us, and that his wisdom is always available. This kind of prayer goes beyond a set time. It becomes a lifestyle. When you engage in consistent prayer, you begin to align your desires with God's. Prayer helps refine your heart and purify your motives. It allows God to mold you, to soften you, and to convict you when you stray from his will. Prayer is also a powerful tool of transformation. It doesn't just change your circumstances, it changes you. In prayer, you are not merely asking for blessings, you are becoming more attuned to God's heart. As you grow in your prayer life, your desires begin to reflect his desires. You stop asking God to bend his will to yours, and instead, you ask for the strength to bend your will to his. Effective prayer is also about vulnerability. It's about being real with God, bringing your whole self to him, the good, the bad, and the ugly. In moments of prayer, you pour out your heart before God, trusting that he understands, that he listens, and that he cares. Prayer is a safe space to express your joy, your sorrow, your frustrations, and your hopes. When you communicate with God consistently, you build a trust that he hears you even when your words falter or when your heart is heavy. He is not distant or disconnected. He is near, always present, always listening. Through consistent prayer, you also build spiritual resilience. There will be times when you feel as though your prayers are not being answered, but prayer is not just about getting what you want. It is about building trust in God's timing and his sovereignty. It is in those moments of waiting, when answers seem delayed or unclear, that prayer deepens your faith. Prayer teaches you to trust, to surrender, and to rest in God's perfect will. It reminds you that God knows what you need before you even ask, and he will supply it in his perfect way and timing. When prayer becomes a constant thread in your life, you begin to realize that you are never alone. You have access to the creator of the universe at any moment, and that access gives you peace, direction, and strength. It anchors you in moments of uncertainty and builds your faith in moments of doubt. Prayer connects love in action. This kind of service goes beyond simply meeting the needs of others. It is fueled by love, compassion, and a deep understanding that serving people is serving God. It's an overflow of a heart that has been touched and transformed by grace, a heart that desires to pour out what it has freely received. Joyful heart in service is not dependent on recognition or reward. It finds fulfillment in the very act of giving. Joyful service begins with the posture of the heart. It's not about what you do, but the spirit in which you do it. You can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. True service is rooted in love, a selfless, sacrificial love that seeks nothing in return. It's the kind of love that compels you to step out of your comfort zone and into the needs of others. Serving with joy means seeing beyond your own circumstances and recognizing that someone else's pain, struggle, or need is an opportunity for God to work through you. It is being sensitive to the Holy Spirit's promptings, aware that even the smallest act of kindness can make a lasting impact. Serving with joy requires humility. It's understanding that no task is beneath you and no person is unworthy of your time or effort. It's washing the feet of others, figuratively and sometimes literally, without expecting acknowledgement. A joyful servant doesn't need a stage or applause. They understand that God sees every hidden act of love. Humility in service is realizing that the position of serving does not elevate or diminish your worth. It simply aligns you with God's heart. It's embracing the truth that greatness in God's kingdom is not measured by status, but by willingness to serve. This kind of service is not selective. It doesn't pick and choose who is worthy of help. A joyful servant understands that everyone is deserving of love, grace, and compassion, regardless of their background, beliefs, or behavior. Serving others with a joyful heart means showing kindness to the difficult, patience to the frustrating, and generosity to the undeserving. It's loving people where they are, without conditions or expectation. This reflects God's unconditional love, the same love that was extended to us while we were still broken and lost. Serving joyfully also means serving consistently. It is not a one-time gesture or something reserved for convenient moments. It becomes a way of life, an ongoing practice. It's waking up each day with the mindset, how can I be a blessing to someone today? It's offering a listening ear to the lonely, lending a helping hand to the weary, and sharing encouraging words with the discouraged. Service doesn't always have to be grand or visible. Sometimes it's the unseen sacrifices, the prayers whispered for others, the quiet support in times of struggle that carry the greatest impact. To serve with joy is to serve without complaint. It's easy to grow weary or frustrated when the load feels heavy or when our efforts go unnoticed. But joyful service presses on not because it is easy, but because it is meaningful. It's understanding that the work you do, no matter how small or large, contributes to something far greater than yourself. It's about embracing the work with gladness, knowing that every act of service is an offering to God. Complaining drains the joy out of service, but gratitude fuels it. A joyful servant focuses on the opportunity, not the inconvenience. Joyful service also means being intentional with your gifts and talents. God has uniquely equipped each person with specific abilities designed to serve others. Whether it's teaching, encouraging, giving, leading, or simply showing mercy, every gift is meant to be used for the edification of others and the glory of God. Serving with joy involves recognizing those gifts, developing them, and using them wholeheartedly. It's not about comparing your gifts to others, but about maximizing what God has placed in your hands. When you serve in your God-given capacity, joy naturally follows because you're operating in alignment with your purpose. Serving with a joyful heart also involves sacrifice. It's choosing to give your time, energy, and resources even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. It's sacrificing personal comfort to meet someone else's need. This kind of service might interrupt your plans or stretch your resources, but the joy comes in knowing that your sacrifice is never in vain. It's a willingness to give, not just from abundance, but even in scarcity, trusting that God will supply all your needs. Sacrifice in service is not about losing something. It's about gaining the joy that comes from living beyond yourself. Serving others joyfully also requires empathy. It's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to feel their burdens, and to respond with compassion. Empathy drives you to not just acknowledge the pain of others, but to act in ways that bring relief and healing. It's moving beyond sympathy and stepping into action. A joyful servant doesn't just say, "I'll pray for you," and walk away. They look for ways to be the answer to that prayer. It's offering help where help is needed, being present when words aren't enough, and standing in solidarity with those who are struggling. A joyful heart in service understands that impact is not always immediate or visible. Sometimes the seeds you sow in service may not sprout right away, but that doesn't diminish their value. Joyful servants trust that God is working behind the scenes, using their acts of kindness to water seeds that will grow in due time. It's about being faithful in the planting, trusting God for the harvest. This perspective frees you from the need for instant results and allows you to serve faithfully, knowing that your labor in the Lord is never wasted. Serving with joy also creates a ripple effect. When others witness genuine, joyful service, it inspires them to serve as well. Joy is contagious, and when you serve with gladness, it encourages a culture of generosity and compassion. It breaks down barriers and builds bridges. People are drawn to authentic love in action, and joyful service has the power to soften hearts and open doors for deeper connections. It becomes a testimony that speaks louder than words, showing others the transformative power of God's love. Trusting God through trials and triumphs is a powerful declaration of faith that spans every season of life. It is easy to trust God when everything is going well, when the sun is shining and the blessings are flowing freely, but true trust in God is tested in the valleys of life, in the moments of hardship, loss, and uncertainty. It is in these challenging times that our faith is either refined or revealed. Trusting God in both the triumphs and the trials speaks to a deep, abiding relationship with the Creator that is not contingent on circumstances, but is grounded in His character. Trials come in many forms: financial struggles, relational breakdowns, health challenges, emotional burdens, and moments of doubt. Each trial, though difficult, is an opportunity for growth. Trusting God during these times doesn't mean we ignore the pain or pretend everything is fine. It means acknowledging the reality of the struggle, but choosing to believe that God is with us in the midst of it. Trusting God through trials is about surrendering our will to His, knowing that His ways are higher than ours, even when we can't understand them. It is in the trial that we learn to lean on His strength, to rely on His wisdom, and to rest in His promises. When life feels like a storm, trusting God means refusing to be swept away by fear, anxiety, or hopelessness. It means standing firm in the truth that God is sovereign and nothing can separate us from His love. Trusting God in the midst of hardship is an act of defiance against the enemy who would seek to undermine our faith. It's saying, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because God is with me." Trusting God through trials is recognizing that He is the anchor in the storm, the refuge in the chaos, and the peace in the pain. It's knowing that His presence is enough to sustain us when everything else seems to crumble. Even in our trials, we can experience a deeper intimacy with God. When we come to the end of our own strength and ability, we discover the depth of His grace and power. In moments of weakness, we are reminded that God's strength is made perfect. When we trust God during trials, we allow Him to shape our character, to refine us, and to prepare us for what lies ahead. The trials of life are not meant to destroy us, but to build us up in faith, perseverance, and trust. Each challenge becomes a stepping stone that leads us closer to God's purpose for our lives. On the other hand, trusting God through triumphs requires a humble heart. When everything is going well, it can be easy to forget that it is by God's grace that we have been blessed. The temptation to rely on our own strength and ability can be strong, but true trust in God acknowledges that every good thing comes from Him. Triumphs, whether big or small, are reminders of God's faithfulness. Trusting God in the good times means praising Him for the blessings, acknowledging His provision, and keeping a posture of gratitude. It's recognizing that every victory, every success, every blessing is a reflection of God's goodness and mercy. Trusting God in triumphs also means not becoming complacent or prideful. It's understanding that the seasons of victory are just as important as the seasons of struggle. During the good times, we are called to remain vigilant, to continue seeking God, and to stay grounded in His Word. It's easy to rely on God in moments of desperation, but trusting Him in the midst of plenty requires discipline and intentionality. We must guard our hearts against the dangers of self-sufficiency, knowing that it is God who gives us the strength to accomplish anything. In both trials and triumphs, trusting God means having a long-term perspective. We are not living for the moment, but for eternity. We understand that both the struggles and the successes are temporary, and that our hope is in something far greater than what we see with our physical eyes. The Apostle Paul reminds us that our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Trusting God in the present moment means keeping our eyes fixed on the eternal prize. It means choosing to live with a perspective that transcends the ups and downs of life, knowing that God is working all things together for our good. Trusting God through trials and triumphs also requires a continual submission of our will to His. It's easy to trust God when we understand what He's doing, but true trust means submitting to Him even when the path is unclear, when the road is rough, and when we don't have all the answers. Whether in the valley or on the mountaintop, trusting God is about saying, "Not my will, but yours be done." It is in this surrender that we experience the peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, but rests in the assurance that God is in control. Trusting God through both the highs and the lows also involves gratitude. In trials, we thank God for the lessons He is teaching us and the strength He is providing. In triumphs, we thank God for the blessings and the opportunities to bless others. Gratitude shifts our focus from what we lack to what we have, and it helps us to see God's hand in every circumstance. It cultivates a heart of worship, knowing that in all things, whether in times of struggle or success, we are called to glorify God. When we trust God, we open the door for His miraculous work in our lives. He delights in revealing His faithfulness, His power, and His love to those who trust Him. Trusting God allows us to experience His provision, His guidance, and His presence in deeper ways. It is through trust that we witness God's transformation in our lives as we move from fear to faith, from doubt to confidence, from weakness to strength. Ultimately, trusting God through trials and triumphs is about choosing to live in the truth that He is always with us, that He is always for us, and that He is always working on our behalf. It is about choosing to lean on His understanding, not our own, and to rest in the assurance that He has already overcome the world. Trusting God is a daily decision, a decision to surrender our will, our worries, and our desires to the one who holds our future in His hands.